We live in a world where the concept of competition is both highly ingrained and highly debated. Although competition is such a large part of the things that we do in our society, sometimes we wonder if this is really for the best or if it's to our detriment as a human species. It's no secret that competition leads to inequality. Although competition is in large part responsible for a lot of the things that improve our quality of life, it does by nature tend to favor the winners over the losers. Capitalism, for example, tends to incentivize growth and expansion, but does not incentivize generosity. There's an awful lot to unpack here, and this topic obviously has the potential to get pretty political. So with that in mind, I'd like to steer away from the political implications of this topic and focus purely on the concept of competition itself. Remember that competition as a concept is not just about business and politics and how resources are allocated. Competition applies to such a massive range of the human experience, from the corporate world to the Olympic arena, to the university, to the Little League baseball field. More specifically, I'm more interested in what a Taoist would think about the concept of competition, rather than whether it's inherently right or wrong. As I go into this topic, I'm going to avoid conclusive and general statements such as competition is good or competition is bad. I'd much rather you form your own opinion about that. My purpose here is just to provide some food for thought when considering either side of the argument, and to see what perspective Taoist philosophy offers about it. So I think the first point to address is the matter of nature. Taoism is heavily concerned with helping a person to maintain a state of nature. It states that constantly trying to force things to go your way is contrary to nature, since nature is in a state of balance and accomplishes a lot while trying very little. So applying this principle, we can look at nature and its relation to competition to perhaps glean a little bit about what a Taoist might think about it. Now, the first thing to observe is that nature does not try very hard. Water flows downhill, rain clouds break when the force of gravity overcomes the water. Animals hunt and gather food, but do not take more than they need. Now, all this notwithstanding, we cannot say that nature is devoid of competition. Organisms are in constant competition against each other for the resources that sustain life. Science shows us that not only is this competition real, it's actually really important for maintaining healthy ecosystems. Competition ensures that resources are allocated to organisms that are most fit and able to perform their vital functions in an ecosystem. Competition in mating also ensures the passing on of the most optimal genes for the continued survival of a species. Now, obviously, we do want to differentiate a bit here between society and the natural world, because we certainly don't want to deny individuals resources just because they're seemingly less able to benefit the human race as a whole. I'm just trying to point out that competition is in fact a really important part of nature, and that nature and competition can't be divorced from one another. If you do want to consider a human implication, however, think about how humans find their mates. The human mating environment, just like in nature, is inherently competitive. If we were to strive to eliminate competition from our mating practices, it would be extremely difficult to do so. Not only that, but I don't think the result would be satisfactory for most people. Perhaps the most straightforward method of eliminating mating competition would be to put everybody's name into a hat and pick our mates at random. Although this would technically be fair, I don't think that many people would vote in support of such a policy. I think a natural thing to do when trying to consider a Taoist point of view on the concept of competition would be to consider what the Tao Te Ching offers on the subject. Two chapters that I thought were some of the most applicable were chapters 66 and 68. Now, here we're going to run into a bit of a conundrum about translations. Since I, and probably a lot of you, don't read classical Chinese, we're forced to muddle through as best we can by reading the translations of other people. And by the way, if any of you actually have read the Tao Te Ching in Chinese, I would be extremely interested to hear about that. But for the rest of us, we're stuck with translations. And the thing about translations is that everybody translates just a little bit differently. If you've ever read any two translations of the Tao Te Ching side by side, you'll know what I'm talking about. The issue of translation isn't exclusive to Taoism. It's an issue in a lot of the world religions and philosophies. This is why I usually read a couple versions of the Tao Te Ching side by side just for a comparison. So let's do that right now. I'm going to be looking at excerpts from chapters 66 and 68 of the Tao Te Ching, and I'm going to be comparing the Stephen Mitchell and the J.H. MacDonald translations. With that in mind, let's look at 66 with the MacDonald translation. The people will not feel burdened if a wise person is in a position of power. The people will not feel like they're being manipulated if a wise person is in front as their leader. The whole world will ask for her guidance, and will never get tired of her. Because she does not like to compete, no one can compete with the things she accomplishes. And here's the Mitchell translation. The master is above the people, and no one feels oppressed. She goes ahead of the people, and no one feels manipulated. The whole world is grateful to her, because she competes with no one can compete with her. So this time, these two translations end up saying largely the same thing, with a few divergent details. Overall, it's looking like the Tao Te Ching's author is coming against competition as a whole. But now let's take a look at chapter 68. The MacDonald translation says, "The best warriors do not use violence. The best generals do not destroy indiscriminately. The best tacticians try to avoid confrontation. The best leaders become servants of their people. This is called the virtue of non-competition. This is called the power to manage others. This is called attaining harmony with the heavens. Now here's the Mitchell translation. The best athlete wants his opponent at his best. The best general enters the mind of his enemy. The best businessman serves the communal good. The best leader follows the will of the people. All of them embody the virtue of non-competition. Not that they don't love to compete, but they do it in the spirit of play. In this, they are like children, and in harmony with the Tao. So looking at these chapters, they actually seem to say pretty different things. The MacDonald translation points to the virtue of non-competition, whereas the Mitchell translation doesn't speak against competition. In fact, it even allows that people living by Taoist principles may even enjoy competition, but that they do it in the spirit of play. Now, as I said before, I'm really going to be careful to try to leave this open to everyone's interpretation, and I'm not going to try to push any conclusions on anyone. But just for the sake of understanding what the Mitchell translation is getting at, think about the different types of athletes or business people you might have seen in your life. They all compete against each other, but do they all compete in the same way and in the same spirit? I think it's fair to say that they don't. I'm sure you've seen some people who don't want to win, they have to win. These people will go to almost any lengths to beat their opponents, even if it requires them to sacrifice their honesty or their morality. They will employ almost any tactic to get what they want, and if they lose, they become absolutely unbearable. Now, on the other hand, there are others who compete for the simple joy of competing. They would never do anything to unfairly undermine their competition, because their goal is not to win, it's to have a good contest against a worthy opponent. For these people, it's not about winning or losing, it's about the joy of the challenge. One of the best examples that I can think of is the difference between Gon and Killua in the beginning episodes of the show Hunter x Hunter. If you haven't seen this show, the first season is about a boy named Gon Freaks and his challenge in passing the Hunter exam. The Hunter exam is a test which, if he's able to pass, will allow him to become a hunter. Hunter is a title and a career that brings money, fame, and prestige, and will bring Gon closer to his goal of finding his long-lost father, so it's really important to him. During the exam, he befriends a boy his age named Killua, who is also trying to pass the exam. One night, the chairman of the Hunter Association offers Gon and Killua a chance to play a game with him that, if they win, will allow them to pass the remainder of the exam on the spot. The game is simple. All they have to do is take a ball from him, but from the first few seconds it becomes obvious that this task is harder than it sounds. In fact, the chairman is able to easily hold them both off while using only a single hand. After several tries, Killua becomes angry and resentful and eventually quits, but Gon continues to persevere late into the night. When Killua asks him why he bothers with such an impossible task, Gon replies that he wants to at least get the chairman to use his second hand. See, Killua was angry because his focus was on the outcome of the competition, and what he thought it meant about him and his abilities. Gon was able to enjoy himself even in the face of exhaustion and pain, because his focus was on the joy of the competition itself. Now, just for good measure, let's take a look at one more translation of chapter 68. This is the Jiafu Feng translation, and I do hope I'm saying that correctly, but I'm probably not. A good soldier is not violent. A good fighter is not angry. A good winner is not vengeful. A good employer is humble. This is known as the virtue of not striving. This is known as the ability to deal with people. This, since ancient times, has been known as the ultimate unity with heaven. It's interesting that this translation of the chapter renders the virtue of non-competition as the virtue of non-striving. Wu Wei is often translated as effortless action, or doing by the act of non-doing. Perhaps it could be argued then that striving is not necessarily equated with competing. Could there be room in Taoist philosophy for joyful, playful, effortless, flow state-like competition, one free from the stress, anger, and resentment often attributed to competing? Could there be room for a person who excels in their competitive endeavors and then uses the gains of their victories to benefit everyone? I personally think that there might be a place for this, and for this reason, I choose to enjoy competitive games, sports, and yes, even video games. But you guys will have to let me know what you think about this subject. I do think there is one conclusion that is worth coming to, and that's that there does come a point where one's relationship to competition becomes detrimental, and that is the point where somebody needs to win. This is nothing more at the end of the day than trying to force things, and in my experience, trying to force things always leads to trouble. If you want something so badly that you're willing to go to any lengths to get it, that is what will inevitably be asked of you, even if that means going against your morals and beliefs. So just, learn to let stuff go and work at it without forcing. Thanks for watching. Peace and blessings.